Today's guest is someone who's been at the heart of some of the most iconic brand moments of the last few decades, from launching the original PlayStation with a dose of cultural anarchy to working with global giants like Microsoft, MTV, and Coca-Cola. Geoff Glendenning is a marketer, strategist, and now co-founder of Whoop. Is that how you say the company's name, by the way?
Right, yeah, Whoop. It's an onomatopoeia of a soundbite. Whoop, V-O-O-P.
Yeah. How did you get into the industry? What age were you when you got in, and what drew you to get into the industry?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I struggled at school. I know the reasons why now, seeing my son also struggle. But when I left, I didn't know what I wanted to do. In those days, one of the teachers got the short straw and gave you, here's a leaflet, go and read that. There was no really any kind of assessment of you at a certain age when you're 14, 15 to see what your interests are, what your passions are. Are you more creative or more academic? Are you more sport related? It was just like, right, here we are. You learn this. This is the education. We're creating a workforce. Don't ask questions, do your best and off you go. And I was going to join the military. That's one thing I was very good at school, just in the Army Cadets. And I thought, well, I'll do that. And I was accepted to the Royal Armoured Corps because I love tanks. And then I went away on a 2-week holiday to the south of France with a mate and had such a fun time that I thought, you know what, I won't do that. So I didn't join the regular army. I just joined the reserves instead and enjoyed that for many years. And then I got my first full-time job, which was my dad had almost forced me, kept saying, right, apply for this job, apply for this. And, you're just living for the weekend, not really thinking about a career, thinking, oh, God, got to do a job 9 to 5, the rat race. Surely there's something out there I could enjoy. But at the same time, it was kind of staring me in the face that I'd always had a love of video games, from the arcades in the 70s onwards to my Atari 2600. Then I think probably the ZX Spectrum, which really was an epiphany moment for me as far as the enjoyment of games. And that was really playing Elite, which was, on 48K, you had worlds to explore, space, sandbox game. The only restriction was your imagination. And of course, what they did in Elite was to create the first game, which had a credit system. And of course, the one thing you did with trading, you'd go to different planets and different solar systems, if you like, and prices would be different. But you realized that the best things you'd trade and get into trouble with was drugs and guns. So you're always being chased by the police and just the joy of destroying another ship and you'd upgraded your ship with a scoop to be able to see what cargo you got. And there's always a lucky dip of what you're going to pick up. So, that really, there's something throughout my life from then and to now. So I'm 60 and I still play games, and I'm very passionate about games, from, the Spectrum to Commodore 64 to the Atari ST to the Amiga 600. I then went PC and then came back in. I got a SNES, but, I wasn't really into the 16-bit. I preferred the PC, and I was working with Amiga as well at that time. But my first job was with one of the largest furniture companies in Europe. And I worked my way through the management training. I got a good understanding how a huge retail operation works, from distribution through the stores, head office. And I quite enjoyed it. And then I saw an advert for a job in the marketing department. That's something I'd studied at college. I enjoyed marketing, and I applied for the job. They wanted a manager with 5 years experience, and I was an assistant manager with 2 or 3 years experience. But I got the job. So at the age of 22, I was one of the top print buyers in the UK. I had a budget over £10 million a year to do print buying for all the brochures. I commissioned a photographer. I was hanging out at photography studios, art directing, it was furniture. It was kitchens and bedrooms, and, it was pretty cool. And then I leapt into an advertising agency. So I worked my way up through a traditional business into the marketing, and then I moved into advertising. And that's where I had the opportunity where we pitched for the Commodore Amiga account. And at the time, I was only the only person that seemed in the agency that had a real passion and understanding of games. So I kind of came up with a strategy. And they were going head to head with Sega and Nintendo at the time. You know, the SNES and the Mega Drive were synonymous with games for 10 to 14-year-old boys. And this was a home computer. So we kind of targeted at parents to say this is a choice if you want to be make a responsible decision for
Yeah.
your kids. They can do their homework on it. Not that they ever would, but they're going to play games on it. But it didn't matter. And I worked on that until unfortunately Commodore Amiga went into liquidation. They the Amiga
It
600
was a
was
time.
great, but the Amiga CD32 wasn't really 32-bit. It was a lot
Yeah.
of ported games over from the Amiga 1200, and they didn't do their own games really, so they were relied on third parties.
Yeah, there was an interesting time around that time. I mean, everybody was trying to do the 32-bit thing. What was coming next after 16-bit? And the race was very real with all these different formats and failed attempts from most of them, even somebody like Sega
Yeah,
in the end as well.
yeah,
So
yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah.
So how did that take you further then to towards where we're going soon?
Yeah. Well, I got made redundant on the back of the fact that we lost the Commodore account, which was quite nice because I had a month gardening leave. So they gave me a month's money to sit at home. And I'd already interviewed for a job with Grey Entertainment and Media, which is a very cool little agency based in Soho, part of the big Grey agency. So, the big traditional advertising agency had this very cool offshoot, which was using graphic designers and looking at strategically activity that wasn't just about mass media, but there was a lot of that. And my account was Acclaim. So I worked on Mortal Kombat 2 and Wolverine and Judge Dredd. And then about a year or so, year and a half, I was contacted about a potential job at Sony Electronic Publishing. No mention of PlayStation. This is 1994. And I got the job, and I joined at the time where Sony had set up their infrastructure for clearly looking to launch the PlayStation. But they were distributing third-party titles for the Mega Drive and the SNES. And as I joined in around August 94, um, I was suddenly aware of this new console that Sony had developed and was launching in Japan in 1994. And I got a NTSC with Ridge Racer, and I've got goosebumps talking about it now because being a big gamer and having played Ridge Racer at the arcades and not being that blown away by the kind of the arcade type games that were on the SNES and the Mega Drive, although I did enjoy some of those. I prefer much larger strategic games and the arcades. So seeing Ridge Racer for the first time and playing it like it was arcade quality, and Tekken was absolutely, in fact, it looked better than the arcades. That came a bit later, but yeah, we had Ridge Racer, Battle Arena Tishinden, which was the fantastic kind of 3D fighting game with the brilliantly hidden 11-button move that blew fireballs out of the monk's arse. The developers had sort of snuck in there, which was great. But I love Ridge Racer. The fact it was a really intense game. It was brilliant. But it's the first game I've ever played where you can drift around corners, which felt great if you nailed it. But then, of course, you had the replay, so you could see how you nailed that
Yes,
corner. And the replay, watching
absolutely.
yourself play, was just as much fun as playing.
So I mean, how was this experience then? Were you under NDA around this time? Because this was before the launch of PlayStation, even in Japan, at this point in time.
Yeah, just as it came out. So when it came out in Japan, we then started to obviously wind down the Sony Electronic Publishing third-party distribution. And Sony Computer Entertainment Europe was created in early 95, I think. And then we were basically preparing for the launch, which is amazing that we had we had 9 months build up with Japanese products to demonstrate. And no doubt in my mind that we had an incredible product that took gaming to a whole new area of enjoyment and immersion and graphic quality. It was on CD, of course. And it was during that time I had a bit of a moment of thought where I had an NTC at home, and I just thought, I love this. My mates love this. We love sitting around getting stoned of an evening playing this, and I'm 29, so why are we launching to 10 to 14-year-old boys as the core market? And of course, that is the traditional model for games companies. Sega and Nintendo had always targeted that market. But I think the most the highest number of consoles that have been sold in the UK previously was the SNES, and that sold about 2.5 million. So I felt, well, okay, there's quite a lot of saturation here. We should be we're missing an opportunity that the technology and the type of games that are on the PlayStation have a much wider appeal than just kids. It's not a toy. And I really understood how youth culture, how trends and movements were created in the underground and spread by word of mouth, because at that time, the UK was going through a youth culture revolution with club culture, from late 80s rave into dance, house music obviously come out of, if you like, disco, the warehouse parties in New York. You suddenly had clubs like the Ministry of Sound, huge super clubs. Everybody was suddenly dressing down. It wasn't long before that you couldn't get into a nightclub if you weren't a bit suited and booted and wearing a pair of shoes. And now people, we're going in sneakers and tracksuit bottoms and hoodies, and so the UK had more participants going out clubbing in the 90s, early to mid 90s, than all of the youth tribes of the 20th century put together. More participants were involved with club culture. And that's talking about all the way through the 20th century, from, the rockers, the mods, the hippies, the new romantics, the skinheads, the ska, just everything. Didn't come anywhere near as close to the size and the explosion of club culture in the UK. So I understood that.
I remember at the time when I saw PlayStation the first time, that was in the hottest record store in Stockholm. And it was just sitting there right in the middle of everything with, at that time, a back projection screen and whatnot. And it was showcasing Ridge Racer. And it was such a game changer, because it felt like somebody had ripped out the arcade and brought it into the record store. And it wasn't the arcade cabinet. So
yeah.
You're like, what the hell is this? And then that was the, the Japanese version of the PlayStation and everything, and like, oh, coming next year. So I remember the connection started forming of games becoming cool at that time. How did you experience that with both your work but also culturally around you?
Yeah, when I joined PlayStation, I guess the planets aligned for me with my strategic mind, that I was quite experienced. I had over 10 years experience in marketing and advertising and production and print buying, photography, and cardboard engineering. So I had a really broad experience, as well as working in big agencies with huge media campaigns across TV, billboards, press. But I also was connected with the underground. I understood how movements were created. I felt like I had a double life, because going out at the weekends and taking recreational drugs, the choice of that time was ecstasy, which was originally called empathy, but wasn't as marketable. But it's exactly what it created. It released, all your endorphins, all your dopamine, to the point where everybody in that club was a familiar stranger. There was an absolute sense of unity and love that crossed over, age, creed, color, religion. It was just the sense that we're all in this together and going on a collective journey, where DJs you didn't stand there, nowadays people filming the bloody DJ. They're the superstars. They're not. Their job was to create a journey of immersion in the nightclubs with house music. They wouldn't have a predefined set they'd play. They'd have a rough set, but they'd bring half their bloody collection of vinyl with them, and they'd read the room and take the room on a journey and cleanse the dance floor with a tune that would then, reignite it. And of course, people say you don't listen to house music, but you actually feel it. That's the fact that, like disco, I mean, I love, and when I say disco, I don't mean Bee Gees, YMCA, the more
It's
mainstream,
the beat.
but yeah, the underground,
Yeah.
the huge soaring vocals of Jocelyn Brown, Larry Levan remixing, they used to get 7-inch singles where on one side would be the instrumental. So DJs would buy 2 copies, have the vocals and the instrumental, and that's where mixing came from. They'd extend that song, and that's where the kind of the 12-inch remix, and Larry Levan was the king of that. But you also had not just the soaring vocals, which you had the grand piano, you had percussion, which has all of this has quite a physical impact on you, from goosebumps to your heartbeat. Your soul will soar with string arrangements of violins, and percussion, of course, as I said again, particularly there's a real tribal beat to that, and that was an epiphany moment for me that I absolutely loved. That I spent my weekends doing that. So for me at PlayStation, I could combine, well, I'm cynical about an over reliance on just spending all your budgets on advertising. It was a bit of a I'd worked in advertising, and the more you could get your client to hemorrhage their money on TV campaigns, which is, in London only, a 30-second spot for an advertisement would be like £75,000 in those days. So you can just literally just burning money. And as an account director, you'd be saying to your clients, the more times that your target audience sees that TV commercial, the more impact it has, which is frankly bullshit, because it's just spending huge amounts, millions, in quite a high level of unaccountability of exactly how many people have seen that commercial. But you just said, you have such a huge scattergun campaign of the advertising. The people have seen it, but you'd see it again and again and again and again. You just didn't need to see it that much. So combining that cynicism with the understanding of youth culture and my love of games, I thought, right, we should be launching to an 18 to 30-year-old market. And we should be doing that as a reflection of, as well, the marketing that you identify your key movers and shakers, your opinion formers and influencers. And back then, people weren't called influencers. They were people of influence. They were culturally connected, influential people dictating trends and movements across all areas of culture, from music and clubbing and fashion and art, and then you had skateboarding, snowboarding, the extreme down in mountain biking,
Extreme games and stuff. Yeah.
You had your b-boying, your breakdancing, you had your graffiti, and all of this was the areas of underground culture that I really had a love for. I'm not into football or Formula One, so I was never going to go and spend millions to be able to go and have a box at my favorite football team. But it's not about throwing money at the underground. It's actually about building relationships. And the fact that I was, I guess, culturally connected, friends in music, DJs, bands, I was a clubber, I had the credibility to be in the same room as these people because I was speaking the right language. And by degrees of separation, I was connected to many of them in the music industry and also the club culture and within skateboarding. So during the lead up to the launch in September 1995 in the UK and the rest of the world, we had that 9 months where I spent an awful lot of time on the back of this document I wrote called Credibility for PlayStation, where I argued 18 to 30-year-old market, core cultural credibility, dictating the trends and movements. And from there, you will have an influential sales position of 6 to 60. And as much as the core brand is edgy and cool and credible, and it's not a toy anymore, you could also use individual games to target specifically the younger or older markets. So, you've got the Spice Girls for young girls, you've got golf, you've got Formula One, you've got football, you've got so many, and games that came out once we built that credibility, that I knew that everybody who's anybody within culture was talking about PlayStation. But, we didn't use an agency to do those associations because I was connected with, I guess, the heartbeat of underground culture, and I was mixing within that. I knew there was a real buzz. But I think if an agency had come to us in those days and said, pay us £100,000 and give us a ton of PlayStations, we're going to make it cool. And I say, okay, well, how are you going to qualify and quantify the success of that? What's the accountability? and they'd have to go, well, you just have to trust us, because that was it. There was no way of actually quantifying, qualifying, apart from I'd be saying, no, believe me, everybody's talking about it. Okay, it's starting to appear in the underground press, because I'd done demos to all the underground media that influence in a pyramid of influence. You go to right to the top of the influencers, the opinion formers and influencers, and whether that's individuals, organizations, companies, or media at the heart of different areas of culture, that then trickles down. Originally it would be your opinion formers, influencers, your early adopters, and then the mainstream. But actually, within the UK, there'd become another demographic, if you like, which crossed over a lot of different age ranges, where you had families starting to wear the same clothes, combat trousers, dressing down, sneakers, listening to the same music, and so you had almost this credible mass market who weren't necessarily influential within areas of culture, but were getting these slightly more diluted but interest in the fashion, the music, the clubbing, the graffiti. So
yeah, the timing is so interesting, because it really felt like that year, 1995. All music genres were up in the almost in the mainstream. There was a single from or representation from all these different kinds of cultures and music, fashion. Hip hop was all over the place. Eurodance was all over the place. Techno was all over the place. Rave, it was all
yeah.
All over the place.
And it was in
and then you had PlayStation right in the middle of it.
That's right. It was getting airplay on commercial radio stations. It was in the mainstream chart.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was at that point where club culture went from the underground to absolutely mainstream mass market.
Yeah.
Although I think mainstream and mass market are two different things. I think mainstream is kind of a brand positioning. So it was a great term for our positioning, which was mass market cult. So it's still edgy, but had a huge wide appeal.
You didn't need to go mainstream. You just needed to take advantage of the interest from the mass market, so to say. Yeah.
But I was only marketing manager in 1995. So my area was working within club culture. I was working with a lot of influential underground culture, really just building the hype and expectancy without a lot of marketing being spent on that, because the main marketing had been briefed out in 1994. It was a European-wide advertising campaign, and the positioning for the pitch of that for the agencies was, a young male audience. So the advertising we actually launched with was quite young. It wasn't as edgy as then I changed it to 96 onwards, and what then you saw particularly with the PS2, the dark edginess that went way beyond even where I was as far as the mainstream advertising. What I was doing was recognizing that brands aren't created by mass media. They're created by the golden chalice of recommendation and word of mouth and credibility and associations, and building an army of influential ambassadors, and not chucking money at them, but giving them lots of PlayStations, because everyone loves a freebie. And if you give it to a top DJ who within their peer group is very cool, got a lot of very cool friends, and has his mates over, and they're all playing PlayStation. So, they're, by the nature of the psychology, they love showing the fact they got a free PlayStation off to their mates. And their mates are going, yeah, I was round, so-and-so's place. We were playing this amazing PlayStation. It's incredible. And that would go like wildfire, through culturally connected people. So when I took over as head of marketing in 1996, the head of marketing left at the end of 95, which I was quite shocked by. I thought maybe because he just couldn't work with me, because I was a bit of a, I was on a mission to make gaming cool. And I've actually recently gone through quite a journey seeing my son struggle at school as well, and recognise with neurodiversity that I've no doubt got ADHD. And that was an epiphany moment for me. And I know it's like, there was a joke years ago, how do you know if somebody's a vegan? And the answer was, well, they'll tell you, and the joke about with me, I say, well, how do you know if somebody's got ADHD? I say, well, they'll tell you straight away, really passionately. And then they'll keep telling you, because it's like a wake up call that explains why they felt different throughout their entire life, why they couldn't knuckle down at school unless, for me, it was history. I loved history, all over history. Because you have to be, you can't just be interested in something you're generally not. You have to have a passion. So for me, my passion was games. My passion was marketing, creating brands in the underground, supporting culture, and mixing with very cool people. So I was a bit of a pit bull, I was a bit of a pit bull, and I'd rubbed a few people up the wrong way just because my passion became across, I guess, as a little bit kind of passive aggressive. But, I instinctively know the one thing, your special power with ADHD is you get the bigger picture incredibly quickly. So for
Yeah.
me, the combination of cynicism, mass media, love of clubbing, and understanding youth culture and love of video games, putting those three together was an instant, oh yeah, we should make it older, and this is how we do it, and these are the strategy and tactics. It was really obvious to me. But then when you look back, we were the only country in the entire world that did it that way. And that was a reflection of, well, yes, me being there, the right place at the right time, but also that the UK was so very cool at that time culturally across the world, from music and fashion and
Yes.
clubbing, so and that trickled out, of course, all the way across Europe. I don't think any other European country had club culture go so mass market, but you certainly had incredible club culture in every European country, in all the main cities, particularly in Spain and France and Italy and Germany as well. So a lot of the work we were doing within areas of culture also impacted on that as DJs went touring the world. So I took over in 1996 and fully aligned the entire marketing into the 18 to 30-year-olds. So I rebriefed the agency. We went a lot more edgy and adult with the advertising. I had I put together the work with the Ministry of Sound. They'd approached us. So in 1995, the first room that we ever did in a nightclub was the Ministry of Sound. And actually, I was a bit sidelined, In those days, I was told, right, Geoff, we think this is great. 18 to 30. The advertising's a bit young, but it doesn't matter. You build the credibility with all those meetings and just make it cool. And here's one of the projects which is perfect for you, the Ministry of Sound. So I met with him, MD. I said, okay, what's the budget from my boss? He said, £100,000. Go away. Put it out to tender to 3 companies. We want proposals, costs, breakdowns, drawings, designs, and models. It took me 3 months to put that together into a document, a huge document. And yes, we had snowboarding and inline skating and other, underground magazines tie-ins. But when I finished it and presented it, they said, oh, sorry, we haven't got £100,000 now. We've only got £10,000. And I went, are you fucking joking? I've just spent 3 months doing this, and now I've got to go back to the Ministry of Sound and say, I'm really sorry, that £100,000 is only £10,000 now, So, yeah, I had to go cap in hand to them and say, I'm really sorry. And it's a good job I got on really well with the MD, and he was pretty gutted. But we weren't going to give them £100,000. We were going to spend £100,000 in the club. So what they did eventually, they spent the money themselves. They designed this step-down dark room where they painted the entire room black. The floor was black. The pedestals they designed with TVs on top were black. The PlayStation's, I said, yeah, don't attach the controllers to the pod, because, when you see these pods for Somley nowadays, they're plugged in, and the controllers, in case somebody steals them, are so close to the TV. You need to be back to appreciate it. I said, just let them loose. If somebody nicks them, I'll replace them. Nobody ever did. What's the point? But it was really fitted with their refit. And the games I put on there would be like Ridge Racer, Wipeout, and Tekken. I think there were, I think there were 8 or 10 pods in there. And it was round. They had a problem with the security that they had to keep going round, and for all their staff, instead of working, they'd be sneaking in to play games when they're supposed to work, And it looked stunning. It really fitted. It was just black and dark and felt a bit like you're going into a dungeon or something.
So was this one of the first major events that you did then with the brand?
Yeah,
as well?
club culture. Yeah. I gave, the main thing I did was give a lot of PlayStations away, because, celebrityism is often defined by how many freebies you get. Everybody loves a freebie.
And the visits were frequent.
Yeah, so I wasn't giving them to A-list. I was just giving them to really influential people. And I couldn't give enough away, to the point where I had to buy them from Sony to give away. So I'd buy them with my marketing budget and give them away, hundreds of them. I couldn't give enough away. People would come in from Sony Music. Hey, do you want a PlayStation? There you go. I mean, I guess I was flying by the seat of my pants, and it was a lot of unaccountable. Well, I wasn't selling them. I was absolutely. Another thing with ADHD is you're incredibly trustworthy, incredibly loyal. You're very transparent and honest. So even it would have never crossed my mind, knowing who I am, that anybody would think, should we be, checking where he's giving these? But I just had spreadsheets, everybody's getting them. And so that was all part of 1996, particularly. We had a load of stock, giving them out. And then I took on my first culturally connected person called Pippa Day. And she was working for a friend of mine who had a record label who'd signed Snow Patrol and a band called Bell and Sebastian. And I phoned him up one day for a chat, and I said, how you doing? He said, I'm having a bit of a shit week, mate. So what's going on? He said, well, things are a bit tougher than I've had to let Pippa go, and she's really good. I said, is she, what's her background? She goes, she's big into music, loves her clubbing, really smart, savvy, funny, quirky. I said, okay, well, I could do with somebody like that. So I can't remember whether I just phoned her up, had a chat, and gave her the job, or just met her for a pint, and that was the interview process. I got an instinct immediately. We got on really well, and she became my wingman, my wingwoman, my consigliere, the person I could trust to do all the cool stuff. So I briefed her on the job, which was to go out and identify all the top clubs in the country in every city and town. And we would basically approach them and say, listen, we've done a Ministry of Sound. We've got limited budgets to do this, but we will give you 10 PlayStations. We'll give you 2 controllers for each. We'll give you games ahead of launch. And we'll give you TVs, and we'll replace them all. All you've got to do is set up your own chill out room, And so we had 52 nightclubs in the end, with all perfectly individual designed gaming areas. But also I knew that they'd want that. That's the unique selling point compared to other clubs within their towns and cities, So they would put our logo on every single flyer. So we had, millions of flyers every week going out across the UK with these clubs wanting to say, come to our club, it's brilliant, but we've also got a PlayStation room as well, and so that association, that credibility, where PlayStation became a part of popular culture. And but we used to do a lot of club tours. I did visuals tapes, because in clubs you'd have the DJ, but you'd often have VJs, video jockeys, who would mix visuals live on huge screens, and then you'd often have percussionists as well playing live as well, for that immersive experience. So I gave PlayStations to all, the top VJ video jockeys in the country.
Everybody gets a PlayStation.
Everybody gets a PlayStation. Because they could plug it into the projector,
Yes.
You could plug it in. And at the end of the night,
Absolutely.
Not just was I giving them visuals tapes that they would mix in footage from games into their visuals nights with fractals and trippy graphics as well. But at the end of the night, they'd plug it in, and then they'd have clubbers, playing the DJ on a 25-foot screen, or playing Tekken or Ridge Racer,
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah. Club culture was an obvious place for PlayStation, but also, I built a skate park. And I think that's when I look at 75 grand for a 30-second commercial. I could have built 2 skate parks with that. We built a very cool skate park underneath the Westway in Ladbroke Grove. It's called PlayStation Park. Even after I left, where PlayStation stopped supporting them, and that's not the point. To be credible, it's not just about brand purpose, brand credibility. That is just corporate bollocks through your marketing. True credibility comes from business purpose and brand purpose, and it's a symbiotic relationship. The fact that people were saying PlayStation's amazing, their marketing's great, the product's great, but the people at PlayStation are very cool, and give them a ring. And with the skate park, I knew him anyway. He called me up and said, I'm looking to build a skate park. I said, whereabouts? He said, Ladbroke Grove, love it. How much do you want? He told me, and I went, I'm in. No fucking about with a 3 months, putting it out for tender. I made decisions on the spot, because that's how you stay in front. You become you're creating trends. You're not just part of popular youth culture. You can be proactive and looking ahead to cut your budget, a year ahead, but also having the ability to be reactive with £100,000 out of my 12 million I had set aside, which I'd spend throughout the year for short-term opportunities of support. But also, as I said, because I've been messed around with that Ministry of Sound project, I promised that I would never do that to anybody again. I would make decisions because I didn't need to do any research. I didn't need to put it out to tender. I work with good people. I knew they weren't going to rip me off. I know nobody could rip me off because I knew marketing and production, how much it costs to do printing and carbon engineering and photography and production, and
Yes, because of your agency side.
how much it takes to make a commercial. So I know all this, but I didn't need to mess around. We could move fast.
So, I mean, we've spoken about agility, credibility, both things that are ever so relevant even today. But knowing how Japanese, I worked in Japanese companies as well for a long time. And at that time, it must have been even harder to be somebody who's agile and who connects things with underground and that type of culture. I mean, how did PlayStation react upon you rolling this out in the UK? I mean, and where were the battles? Because I'm sure there were battles.
Well, there was a little bit of battle. I mean, I think the difference then compared to now with perhaps the Sony Corporation is that now there's no autonomy in Europe. Everything answers to America, answers to Japan, and everything is very homogenized, across the world, if you like, apart from Japan. Back then we had Chris Deering, who I would say, although people say Ken Kutaragi is the godfather of PlayStation, they say there's two godfathers, and Chris Deering certainly, to me, it will always be El Presidente, the godfather. Very cool, switched on, savvy American guy, worked in the film industry for Columbia, which is part of the Sony organization. And he, as a reflection of the trust that Japan had, he had autonomy outside. He'd have to answer to Japan, but certainly not America. And within Europe, because that document I wrote about credibility, I put in every pigeonhole, Chris loved it. He loved the edginess, so he was always my biggest supporter. And even the European marketing director, he was happy for me to get on with it. They had a lot of other territories that were struggling, emerging markets they had to deal with. So they're quite happy to see, oh yeah, Geoff knows what he's doing. That's going really well. We'll let him get on with it. So I had total autonomy as well. My MD was from a sales background. A lot of in those corporations, often sales was considered the most important department because they're the ones that bring the money in. But this was a big, I felt we turned that on its head, and marketing was driving sales. In fact, we didn't have enough stock. You're apologizing for not being able to supply enough to stock that the marketing was driving. But, from that point of view, I was probably the most experienced marketeer. I would say arguably, possibly within Europe, because just of my background in, client side and agency. And I was into my photography, and I had a quite strategic and creative mind, and a wicked sense of humor, if you like. That I like things that are a bit tongue in cheek and a bit edgy and a bit, not controversial. Never to go out and upset anybody. So yeah, and it's the nature. We were a startup in a global corporation, so we worked like a startup. We had the energy, the passion of a startup, flying by the seat of our pants. Not working 9 to 5. Well, a lot of people work 9 to 5. A lot of people took an hour lunch. We were working 24/7. Most weekends, I'd be doing something PlayStation related or hanging out with people, talking about what can we do together with PlayStation, because, I had, as I said, a lot of friends who were putting on events and skating and clubbing, and I wanted to get involved with that. So they, the fact that they had my ear as somebody who was really open and understood, not only as a brand, you have to have the credibility of the product to be there, but also you've got to speak in the right language. So yeah, I was very lucky to have Chris Deering. Now, though, as I said, it's completely centralized, if you like, into America. Everything is more analytics and digital. Everybody's terrified about upsetting somebody somewhere in the world, so that's, to be honest, that's fucking life. There's going to be arseholes who upset you. There's going to be people upset you. There's going to be something that makes you feel like, oh, I don't like that very much. But okay, well, should you change everything for a small minority? And I'm not talking about, diversity, equality, and inclusion. I don't think that should ever be an issue. the right person is hired for the job. But we've also gone through that corporate tick box of quotas, of making sure you tick the boxes to have certain kinds of people rather than having the best people for that job. And that I think is the compass has gone a little bit too far the other way. I think within marketing terms, the 90s, pre-social media, was probably the most fun decade that anybody who lived through it remembers with great nostalgia. And anybody who had parents who lived through it or loves that sort of fashion, or it just realizes the doom scrolling and the kind of the insecurity and fear of missing out that social media has created, thinks the 90s was the decade to have been alive. And I was asked, even though Sony is arguably a bit of a faceless corporation now, how come PlayStation is still considered really cool? And I said, well, I think it's because of the 90s, because we were part of that incredibly, hedonistic time. We were everywhere that was cool. And also, therefore, as a kid or as a teenager or 20 something, anybody who remembers those times associates the kind of brands with those times as well. So PlayStation will always have a legacy of being a bit cool, even if it's from 25, 30 years ago.
So, what were your most memorable things during your time with PlayStation? Some of your real, like, this is something that you have and will remember for life.
Yeah. Well, I think with marketing is like a great film. In films you have your story and narrative, but when you're with your mates, you're always throwing out film quotes, or you remember particular lines or particular moments or shots or scenes. And that's like marketing, where people remember the sense of the whole marketing and the story, and perhaps the brand's sort of storytelling went through it. But within that, there will be certain marketing, certain moments that will always resonate. And we were having so much fun, but even then, we weren't really able to, again, quantify or qualify how many people were actually seeing that. But we had faith that if you'd done something really quirky and fun, then people would talk about it. So I guess one of those, when we did Crash Bandicoot, we had a lot of fun with that game, because we did fake road signs with a silhouette. Like in England, you've got triangular road signs, which are red border with white in the middle for anything to warn you about whatever. And we had a silhouette of Crash, and it just said Bandicoot Crossing. So we just had teams going out and putting them up all over lampposts in cities. And we had lost pet posters, lost, handwritten, lost, go, Bandicoot missing goes by the name of Crash with his photograph on it. Call this number, and if you call the number, it would have just some silly recording. And then also in London, when before mobile phones, everybody had mobile phones, people would still use phone boxes, and London is synonymous with the red phone box. Now, every single phone box would be filled with pictures of semi-naked girls and phone numbers. They're basically prostitute.
I remember that.
Yeah, prostitute cards. So I said, come on, let's just do some funny Crash Bandicoot prostitute cards. So we had these. I spoke to Jason Rubin over at Naughty Dog and said,
yeah,
do you mind if we put Crash, in a pair of underpants? Is that okay? He's going, what for? And I told him, he's like, yeah, go on, So we had these pink postcards with Crash in his pants, and it said, new in town, Randy Bandicoot, and phone this number. What I didn't realize was that the phone boxes were owned by pimps. Basically, they had their own. This is my manner. These are my own phone boxes. They owned their own phone boxes, for their own, their own businesses. So the guy that was putting up the postcards got beaten up by a pimp.
Okay. That's a nice postmortem right there.
Yeah, it wasn't. I don't believe it was life changing, but it was quite a shock that I was not aware of that at all. And even so, did they really think that by putting that up there that we're in competition? I guess another one was, which I really back when I was all my friends in creative communities, we'd sit around and have a laugh and we'd get stoned, and that was normalized within my creative circles. and club culture as well. And I knew that people would leave clubs and go home and play games and get stoned, or watch films or hang out. Everything's so much nicer when you're a little bit stoned. I mean, I don't mean this super skunk strains now, but it was a lot milder, a lot more laughy and fun. It's not like monging you out, just enhanced rather than sort of made you go a bit lobotomized. So I
Do you
thought,
think that's where you've been able to come up with a lot of ideas for marketing in your career as well? Or,
oh, hell yeah.
I mean,
So somebody once
yeah,
asked me, what's the difference between, because after Sony, I set one of the world's first kind of integrated youth agencies, which you can talk about. But somebody asked me there, said, what makes a good, what's the difference between a great youth agency and a bad one? I said, well, the bad ones take cocaine and the good ones like to get stoned, you know, and that's why I've always had a hatred. And that's interesting because at Sony, I now since found out that people thought I had a drug problem and it was cocaine, but it wasn't. It was ADHD because I'm like this all the time. And actually cocaine
right.
shut up, and I hate it because it's the most insincere bullshitty drug where you can ever take, that makes you feel utterly shit. You sit around a table with a load of mates talking bollocks and wake up in the morning, everybody without a doubt will go, why do we do that? It's a really awful drug. But the fact that people thought I was on cocaine, I find really insulting. But no, when you're smoking, it's a very creative drug. Um, but also everything's, from thought processes, creativity, strategy, eating, watching films, sitting on the beach, walking in the woods, having sex, you know, everything's better and so much nicer. And dangerous. But yeah, a lot of my great ideas. And I think that's one of them. I came up one night when I was actually, because, in the UK, you smoke joints with tobacco and you make a filter out of cardboard roach, you roll it up, and that would be often off your papers packet, your Rizzler packet, and that would be destroyed in seconds, because you wouldn't get many out. So I thought, I'd been to Sony Music, and we'd given most of the Sony Music artists PlayStations as well, because I knew them all there. Oh, and Virgin Music. I had a mate who worked at Virgin Music, so he gave all his artists PlayStations as well. So it was quite connected to the music. And Cypress Hill were one of the artists that Sony had. And every time I go into Sony, I go, floor to floor, every record label, and I'd come back with like a stack of music and vinyl and the Cypress Hill album, when I opened it, the CD case cover inside had been perforated. The card had been perforated for exactly why Cypress Hill were big stoners, and smokers. And I thought, that's a great idea. So I thought, I want to do a load of flyers. And being the fact I was a print buyer, I'd been a print buyer in cardboard engineering. So I knew exactly the weight of the card, exactly the size of the perforations. So there'd be perforations so you could tear off a little roach snippet, roll it up, and there were 40 on each card. And I'd come up with the image for the point of sale, which was a black guy holding the controller. And it was just him holding the control with his eyes looking straight at you going, go on, it's a bit naughty, have a go. And that was our point of sale image, and also his image that I put on this flyer. And I did 1.2 million that were distributed by the companies that do all the other flyers for all the clubs, outside clubs. Every time you left a club, you'd be given a load of flyers. And they phoned me up on a Monday after they'd put 1.2 million out. I also inserted, a slightly larger one in all the cool magazines like ID, Days of Confused, Jockey Slot, Her Garden, DJ, Mix Mag, so just all the really cool magazines. And on the Monday, the flyer company phoned me up and I said, how did it go? It said, that was the most successful flyer we've ever given out in the history of club culture. Nobody had ever done it before. And of course, I recognized that it wasn't just an advert that people just throw on the floor. It actually had a really practical use. So they said, listen, we were giving flyers out. People would walk away, look at it, come back and grab a handful. And they grab a handful so they could give it out to all their mates. So not only were they distributing flyers by the club, flyer companies, but also every handful they gave to a club, I was also giving it to all their mates, and that's understanding your target market. That's understanding the psychology of gaining acceptance into your target market's environment, entertaining, having some fun, engaging, and that's the kind of marketing that I think has been lost nowadays, where, I said earlier, it's too analytics, it's too social media based. And yet there should be no excuse for with the games industry, there shouldn't be any excuse for not having fun in the real world still. that then you've got this amazing distribution across social media by filming it and photographing it. We were doing it just because we knew that it would travel word of mouth, peer to peer, and become almost like mythical in its legend.
But that's interesting. Let's talk about that as well then. I mean, as the years went on, we started becoming more analytical and data informed, and even in some points data driven. For somebody like you who is so into things, feeling things, passionate, how did that translate for you? Did you reject that way of thinking, or did you embrace it when you, maybe even at PlayStation, but even after you moved on from PlayStation as well?
Well, a little bit. I mean, I was, I guess, lacking in a certain amount of experience of managing or running departments. But the one thing I didn't do was go to my MD and say, I'm really overworked here. I'm 1996. I was doing 4 jobs. I was head of marketing. He didn't promote me to the marketing director because then he'd have to pay me more. So I was always head of marketing. But I was also marketing director. I didn't have a marketing manager. I was doing that role, and I didn't have a sponsorship manager, and I was doing everything in house. And we weren't just using agencies. We were conceiving and producing and delivering a lot of the activity in a small team. So I was incredibly overworked. With hindsight, I would have recruited more people. I would have not actually delegated more, but I couldn't delegate to people who were corporate marketeers. You can't teach a corporate marketeer youth culture. And the same, because you have to have experienced it to understand it. And I advise and mentor people now and say, okay, what are you into? Oh, you're into your music. Oh, okay, you're a skater. All right, that is really important. Put it on your CV. That's life experience, not just your work experience. These are your passions. And that is priceless when you've got a connected team in-house who understand it and have been part of it. And it's easier to teach somebody who's not been from marketing but understands culture and is part of that. It's very cool. It's easier to teach them marketing than it is. You can't teach culture to somebody who's a corporate. That's why they use their agencies. That's why they use analytics. That's why they're, number crunching rather than going on an instinct. So yes, I didn't do any research. I did one bit of research. I was kind of, told you've got to do some research. So I had to spend, I don't know why, £75,000 seems to be the number that keeps popping up, but it happened to be £75,000. And it took about 3 months for the advertising agency to recruit, various focus group panels across the country and major cities, and then come back and do a big report. And basically that £75,000 gave me a load of charts saying we'd increased the brand awareness amongst this target market by 5%, which to me was utter bullshit. I didn't need to know that. I wasted the money, because I was the target market, but also I was very experienced in marketing, every aspect from client and agency side. I didn't need to do a load of research. So when I set up my agency again, we didn't used to do any research. It just existed. We specialized in making brands culturally connected. And when I say my agency, we integrated. So integrated is when you have a core idea, a core strategy or creative that is conceived to work across multiple marketing touch points. So not siloed in PR or advertising or direct marketing, and brand neutral, media neutral, sorry, not brand neutral, excuse me, media neutral is basically when you have a brief from a brand and you have no limitation of what that marketing solution will be to achieve those objectives, because you're not just an advertising agency or just a PR agency or just a digital. And you found that if you went to an advertising agency, they would say, you need to spend all your money on advertising. And same with the digital, same with the. So I like the fact that we were conceiving activity for Greenpeace. I brought Banksy in to do an image which upset Disney intentionally, because Banksy created the image of the Jungle Book characters all tied up and bound and gagged with an executioner to represent deforestation. And the deforestation, the knock-on effect of that is in impacts, the North American bear with Baloo. the Siberian tiger with, is it Shere Khan or Khan? And you got King Louis, the great apes. You got Mowgli, the indigenous people. It was a perfect image that would immediately get Disney sending legal action threats to Greenpeace. And I knew from the point of view, when you do any controversial marketing, you send all the materials out on the day before you actually launch. And then you just say, okay, we're sorry, we won't send any more materials out. Because you'd already sent them out. And then you can use, Greenpeace can use that to filter into the media about how Disney is threatening legal action against Greenpeace for using this image by Banksy. So you get incredible awareness through the supposed negative PR of this, but it's not negative PR, it's brilliant PR. So yeah, back to your question, analytics, number crunching. I mean, I'm very good with figures, having been an account director, and being responsible for making sure every penny was billed to the client correctly. And when I had a £12 million budget, I cut that to the penny. So I was never just, I was very aware of my expenditure and the accountability of what I was spending on, if you like. As far as the rise of social media, I've written a number of times about social media, how agencies persuaded their brands to jump lemming-like onto social media without necessarily the reason to be there. But, we've got to have a social media campaign. And it was judged its success by, how many people have followed the page, how many people have liked something, but very rarely on the ongoing engagement of, are they sharing that content, and nobody gives a shit about what most brands put out on social media. I mean, really? Yes, you'd be interested in your Adidas, your Nike, music products that you're into, a part of your lifestyle. But do you care what bloody Tesco's puts out or supermarkets? No. So no, I've never been really somebody. I always go on an instinct, and I think when you get older and experienced, that gut feeling, you become pretty convinced that you know your shit, and if you've got an instinct that something is right, then bloody hell, it's going to be right. And I've been working for 40 years now, so I've never, to be honest, I don't think I've ever been wrong. I've made a few mistakes.
What was your biggest one then? What's been your biggest learning so far in your career? Something that
I just started sweating about this. So
what comes up immediately when I ask the question?
Perforated cards again, but the one I said about, the one I said
the great success and a failure at the same time.
Yeah, well, Chris Deering loved it. He loved them. He loved the idea. He says, "Hey, we'll just tell people to put it's for writing their number on or something." We called them the jigsaw flyer. We didn't call them roach cards. We called them perforated flyers for making a jigsaw or something. It's tongue in cheek. And, it's not like we were handing them outside of fucking schools or anything. It was very highly targeted in club culture for, people who knew or were in the know. But the first time I did it was in 1995. And there was a magazine had written did their first write-up on PlayStation. And within it, there was a tongue-in-cheek quote where it said, "It's more powerful than God." Which was like, the games are so good, 3D, real-time environments, arcade, perfect. It's more powerful than God, Now, I'm not religious, and back then, religious extremism wasn't particularly, it's not like it is now. But I said, I'm going to go to Glastonbury, and I had backstage from Sony Music. I was given a couple of tickets to go and hang out at Glastonbury for an entire week. It only opens Thursday night, I think, and I was down there from the Monday, and it was beautiful sunshine every single day. And I was backstage hanging out with some people I knew who just happened to be the main drug dealers for Glastonbury, all the artists. So, and basically I pitched my tent up because I was I'd created these perforated cards with "It's more powerful than God" PlayStation on it. And I'd taken boxes and boxes and blagged my car backstage. They said, yeah. So I need to drop these flyers off. I got backstage and everything. Yeah. All right, mate, make sure you take your car off afterwards. And of course I just hid it and left it there. So I had all these flyers, but of course, all of the kind of celebrities, a who's who of the music and fashion, and anybody that was at Glastonbury that was backstage was coming to my mate's fucking tent, which was like a big military canvas tent, you know. So I'm just, meeting and greeting, handing out cards. But before I went to Glastonbury, I'd had a call from from a company saying, "Would you like to make your flyer into a poster and put it around Glastonbury?" And I thought they meant the festival, inside the festival, a really focused audience who would appreciate it and find it funny, wouldn't take it seriously. But unfortunately, they plastered it for miles around the festival in all the towns and all the roads everywhere. And nobody could quite see that it was a quote from a magazine. All they could see was, "It's more powerful than God, PlayStation." So when I got back, it was shortly after that, the following week, that I was hauled into my boss's office and told that we'd had a fatwa threatened against Sony because of the blasphemy of these perforated cards, which made me shit my pants a bit, as far as, I didn't mean to upset anybody. What the hell's a fatwa? I didn't know. Does that mean I'm going to go home one night and out the bushes, somebody will come and go, "Doo, doo," back of the head? I mean, how much trouble are we in? I don't know. I only found out last year that I wasn't in a huge amount of trouble from the point of view of a fatwa, but I'll talk about that in a sec. But the thing was, it wasn't threatened against PlayStation, it was threatened against Sony hardware. So it really pissed off Sony hardware. And there was a lot of fear of the media might pick this up, and what would happen, and I'd lose my job. We even got a 2-page letter from a PR agency questioning why Sony would have somebody like me working for them, and how this would be picked up by the conservative sort of media, and talking about how PlayStation is blasphemous, using drug culture to sell games to kids. You know how they put a spin on it, even though it wasn't particularly true. But also, they said it was such a serious issue, it could be brought up for debate in Parliament. So I spent a bit of time shitting myself, but it all blew over, fortunately. But I'm still worried about that, is the blasphemous quote, and whether it's considered. It's not a line that Sony, it's not an advertising line that Sony had. It was a quote from a magazine, and it was only used at Glastonbury. And I burnt all the other perforated cards and, never used it again. But I've been working with Voop on this AI feedback research and insights product for games players. And one of the founders is a Muslim, and I told him this, and he was cracking up. He's going, "Mate, honestly, I wouldn't worry about it. I don't, I wouldn't worry about it. It's like 20, it's 29 years ago, and I've been worried about it for 29 years." And he laughed even harder again. "Honestly, mate, they send fatwas to everybody. They're sending them out. Anything that's slightly upset, everybody gets fatwas. Don't worry about it." I went, "Fucking hell." But I'm still worried,
So what about learnings? Let's talk about learnings.
Let's talk about
both from that.
Let's talk about the shit state of the industry, and perhaps how it got here, and what the solution is, if there is a solution. Because there's a lot of uncertainty. 30,000 layoffs. More to come. I've got to say, I know there's more to come. And I know that, particularly when Microsoft had bought Bethesda and Activision, and then, they had games competing against each other. They've also got teams in those individual companies where they can make them redundant and centralize it and bring it all in-house. They just had a big wave of 9,000, and I know there's more to come. But also the games industry. Okay. I've got a PS4, and interesting. The funny thing is, when I lent all my merchandise from the '90s to PlayStation Europe for a pop-up museum for the launch of PS4, I seem to be the only person that actually hoarded and collected all the memorabilia from that era. So they bought it off me. I said, "Can I have a PS4 in return?" He said, "Yeah, no problem at all." And I thought, said, "Come in and get one from the office." Took 6 months to get it, because they had to get it approved from Japan, and it just went round in circles. So they don't do any of that, anything like that anymore. But I've got my PS4, and the games have got so very good. You play them for years. You don't play games, finish them, and buy another. You don't play games that get your mates round to share controllers. You don't play many arcade type games at all. You're playing games that, whether they're live service with GTA 5 that's been going for 12 years, or Fortnite, or FIFA's not live service, but religiously. So I've got two sons. My youngest is 15. He plays FIFA. He plays Fortnite. He sometimes goes back, does a bit of Skate or Spider-Man, but those are his two go-to games. He'll get some freebies off the PlayStation Store. My eldest son plays FIFA and UFC. They don't buy many games. I played Red Dead Redemption 2 for 3 years solid, nothing else. I played it every day. Um, I've just gone back to Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I played for 2 years as well. But I thought I miss it. I haven't played it for years. I'm going to go back and play it as the sister now instead of the brother. And that's the problem. Games have got so good, they're so immersive, and that's just at PS4. That what's the advantage really of the next generation of consoles beyond there? Yeah, they've sold well and people have to have, but there's no must-have game that's made the consoles fly off the shelf and made people give up their PS4s. Go right. The only one I think that will do that finally is going to be GTA 6, but of course that's been delayed. That's costing $2 billion to make. I mean, God Almighty, it's terror for anybody else who's going to try and launch it against them, because originally they're launching this Christmas, and nobody was going, well, we don't know when to launch. We can't launch around that, because nobody's going to buy anything else. They're just going to play GTA 6 for that amount of time. So you've had these incredible games that development costs have gone through the roof. People don't want to take risks. They're going with sequels often with existing franchises because they know there's an audience there. It's impossible to take risks because doing, that amount of development now is a huge risk. The double A, you've only got triple A's, and you've got the double A market is a void at the moment. You've got 20 to 28,000 games a year on Steam. The discoverability is really difficult. So you've got games that cost a lot more to make. You've got consoles that are really expensive where people are a bit short of money, and the games play experience isn't really that much better than a PS4. So I think the console cycle is broken. The idea that the games industry is consolidated, there's less sort of risk and new genres and creativity, apart from in the indies. And, although with AI and the ability with small teams to create highly polished games, I think there's a real, lower price double A kind of, play it for 6 weeks or get your mates round. Brilliant. You've got value for money. Put all that into the mix. And then you had COVID, of course. Everybody sat at home with loads of money playing shitloads of games. Well, yeah, right. Okay, so is that sustainable growth when we come out of lockdown? Is it? Fuck. Anybody who's got kids or plays games knows that that is not sustainable growth. They know that the market, unless you're going to be better than the market leader, who's going to play your game? So on the back of COVID, huge amounts of investment came into the industry with development roadmaps that would bring those games out 23, 24. And then they're suddenly bringing that going, it's not as good as we thought it would be. Oh, well, there's a saturation of that type of genre of game. Everybody's competing against each other. And also you've got companies that are listed that have quarters to make, and they're suddenly going, shit, we've got to cancel that game. We've got to shut that studio. We've got to show a better bottom line for our shareholders. And we're going to do that by just going, right, shit, 30% cuts, make people redundant, which is fucking brutal in my mind. But also, why are people making games that they don't know that there's a market? They don't clearly see the market fit for it. Are you making games because you want to make that blade of grass look so? Do you want to make it so real world realistic? You're spending money that may not be recouped because your development costs are too high and your market fit, the commercial rationale hasn't really been looked into by people perhaps who also play a lot of games but work at the business side, and understand the market that well. So, yeah.
So knowing where we are with all this now,
Yeah.
what is your biggest I mean, if I usually ask this from people I interview as well. I mean, if somebody's getting into the industry or they are currently let's say that they don't have the shining star at the moment and they're kind of lost, what is your based on your experience and your background and also what you're working on now, what do you see for us in the future, and what would you say to that person?
Say, don't go and find a job somewhere else. They find a job.
this,
Yeah.
and the worst part is that you're not the first one saying this. But
Uh,
for the people who are like us, who really
well, the
love
market.
what we do,
Okay. Wait. The trouble is though that with lots of technology advancements and lots of the changes in marketing, I didn't do a marketing degree, so the strategy that I come up with very fresh and new and very instinctive, combining all that experience. The education that you were learning about marketing was very traditional. There's none of the work that we were doing was being taught in universities then. There's a cycle. It takes many years to catch up. And that's the same with university courses for games design or PR or marketing. And, by the time you've come out with your degree, the industry could be very different. We've not just got the exponential growth of AI and nobody quite knows what jobs that's going to change. But with AI, you've got the areas. I mean, the AI I work in, and actually I think we should talk about what Voop does, because I've had many conversations, being that I've been in and around the industry for 35 years and I can pick up the phone to very senior people. I was talking to Ian Curran, who's the just outgoing president of Sega America, did a demo of Voop, had a chat about the industry, spent about an hour talking of similar things that I've just talked about. And I've picked up these conversations that have been absolutely validated by so many interviews I've seen of people saying, well, why are we struggling? How did it get here? That he said, fundamentally, the biggest problem the industry's got is that the research methodology is shit. It's so archaic in many ways that big development decisions have been based on insights that are coming from surveys or focus groups. And they are fundamentally flawed, and that nobody really fills in a survey accurately. They don't really give a lot of information. It's a pain in the ass to do unless it's incentivized. And the kind of people who do it are either really pissed off or really happy. So, you're getting data in and insights out, which are quite questionable. Now, if you want to do a deeper dive into qualitative, how people are feeling, then you might outsource that to a third-party company who would spend quite a few months recruiting and interviewing panels to then do a big report on the research that the games company wants them to do, whether it's about a particular genre or the next installment of a game. And focus groups can often be led by the person who's actually taking the focus group. You've got people who are quite shy and don't really want to be controversial. So often they don't know how they often won't be absolutely honest, or they might easily be led by the alpha within that group. So focus groups are fundamentally flawed. Now, with AI, you've got the idea that AI gorges data. A good thing about AI is that what Voop does is that we can take, for example, we did a project with Hutch Games. We took 32,000 answers from surveys on one of their games. It would normally take the researcher 2 or 3 weeks to get through 20% of those surveys. And then he'd have to go into meetings, are based on assumptions and a hunch. We ran that entire data through Voop, which understands every aspect of a game, is contextualized for that particular game. And we ran that through all the data, 100% of it, overnight. And then the researcher could then take a deep dive into all of the data. The key scores were showing, whether they were low. You could then go in and find out why they're low, because each response has been topicked and tagged with exactly what they're saying, whether it's gameplay, monetization, progression, community. And that, in my mind, is what AI can do, because business development decisions have been made upon poor quality insights. And that has been confirmed by a lot of very senior people. So
have you seen that a lot throughout your career as well?
As I said, I don't like research. I tend to, because of my ADHD, I've worked in.
Well, does that mean then that you've made poor decisions because you haven't used research?
No, because I've worked in areas that I have absolute passion and understanding for.
Yeah.
So, within, you go to an advertising agency with a brand, they'll research it because they don't necessarily know about that particular product or brand or market. And they've got to actually pull a load of research together to justify why they're spending so much on this advertising. And, But for me,
So what you're saying essentially is to be, you can be data informed, but you should, especially for somebody like you,
yeah,
you can still retain that feel for the pulse,
yeah.
and you can combine that into good
Yeah. I
insights.
had a conversation with a guy yesterday who was he was in the dev teams for about 17 years at Sony, and he was saying that we'd met briefly. We met briefly, many years ago, and we reconnected. And he was saying he remembered me coming to a meeting about Parappa the Rapper. Now the management was saying, we're not going to release this game. It's 2D. PlayStation is 3D. And he said he remembers me saying, no, but this is quirky and it's funny and it's bonkers. It's really tongue in cheek. It's just Japanese culture. And it doesn't matter if it's 2D. The game's great. It's fun. It's silly. And that's because I'm a games player. Whereas a lot of the management who didn't play games didn't know whether it was any good or not. They just had to go by, research or so I've never had to do that, but I've only ever worked on stuff I'm interested in. So when I had my agency, my clients were Microsoft Games and then Xbox, Sega Dreamcast, Activision. I launched Tony Hawk Skateboarding, Apocalypse and Tenchu for them. I worked with Greenpeace, Coca-Cola, Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I love ice cream. Ministry of Sound, World Cup Skateboarding, Volcom Clothing, Vans Shoes, Smirnoff Vodka. I didn't work with the Inland Revenue or a building company. It was brands that I knew that wanted to work with my agency because we could make them cool and do cool marketing for them. So I didn't have to do any research, no.
Do you think that we've lost this kind of way of doing that, the credible pulse, if you will, and become either too data driven or really nothing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was on a conversation the other day, and it's like, I can't believe people voted for Trump. What is it? And they were saying, well, people are stupid. And say, well, yeah, do stupid people know they're stupid? Well, of course they don't. They'd have to be really intelligent to know how stupid they are. And that's the same with marketing. How do you know if your marketing is any good? Well, I look at marketing and go, that's a bit shit. That could be way better. But to all intents and purposes, the people who've done the marketing have done a load of marketing and sales have been okay. So unless you've done something insanely bad where it's absolutely bombed, nobody can judge whether in an alternate world, you'd be doubling the sales, the marketing would be winning awards, you'd have a whole completely vibe because, it's sliding doors, isn't it? It's alternate worlds. So yeah, I think people get away with being caretakers of brands, with administrators of marketing. And there is a danger that AI can do all of that. Because if they're not bringing anything original, dynamic, strategic, creative to the table as a client-side marketeer, then they have no purpose apart from managing agencies. And agencies can be managed and automated. So when we come back to AI and, talking about, so nobody's having any fun. People are scared to have any fun. People don't know how to have fun because they've grown up in a digital age, obsessed with digital. But actually, the wise elder kind of creatives who have had all that experience of club culture and beyond before everything became so homogenized and same and nothing becomes a trend or a movement. It's just a bloody fad nowadays. You need to combine that enthusiasm, that knowledge of social media and analytics, if you like, with a younger generation, but combine them with the creative and strategic teams. And you need to marry those skills together. So what you've got is incredibly bland, homogenized marketing, and nobody knows it's shit because everybody's doing it, and it's a real shame. I never had a problem with advertising. I love great advertising. My argument was we don't need to keep ramming it down people's throats. Amazing brand stories that are like mini films that are entertaining and engaging will be talked about amongst your mates, will be actively shared with non-paid for media by people on social media because they think it's great. So spend more on production and less on paid for media. But your advertising agency makes all their money on the bloody media. So it's a bit of a conundrum.
But that's also an important point.
It changes with the marketing directors. Marketing director comes in, loves Formula One, sponsors Formula One. He leaves, the person next comes in, likes football, so they do football. But within youth culture, as I said, it's about support and relationships. And business purpose is about a long-term vision of support. And you can do so much good with marketing. So I didn't want to build one skate park. I wanted to build loads of skate parks. And then I wanted to actually support mentor programs and youth clubs. Youth clubs, particularly in tough areas, they're safe havens for kids that are vulnerable, particularly with gang culture, you've seen. But in this country, we've seen the rise of gang culture. We've seen the rise of stabbings, antisocial behavior, postcode wars, fueled by, gangs dissing the next postcode gang across social media and calling them out, the police were cut by 20,000 quite a few years ago. And I know that wasn't the police necessarily at the front line who are making the arrests. They were the ones that were winning hearts and minds in the communities, a lot of them. They're the ones that were liaising with these gangs. They knew the kids. They'd seen them grow up on the estates. They give them a clip round the ear. All of that went. All of the youth clubs had their funding removed. So suddenly you've got no safe haven for kids. You've got postcode wars, gang culture, and brands like PlayStation could have done so much. And I was talking about this 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Nothing's changed, and nothing like that happens because it's the moral compass, or people who actually want to make a difference. And people don't have to do that. They can just they can be administrators. There's nobody got that passion. Hang on, this is games. We come and go, right, what can I do? The only restriction is our time and our imaginations, because half the work we did ourselves in-house, so it was legwork with some money as well. It wasn't like we were just spending it with an agency and that's how you cut the budget. So we kept on coming up with fresh ideas, constantly creating more work for ourselves. But I think that sort of passion is missing in a lot of marketing now.
I always want to make sure people get a good advice from people who've been in the industry for a long time. Knowing you being so rebellious, being so in the moment with the pulse, what would you give to a marketeer in this day and age?
Well, to anybody who's out of a degree looking for a job, I would say the opportunity you've got to see the world is amazing. The opportunity to have a job where you can do your own hours, where it's not 9 to 5 and it's a rat race. You can work anywhere in the world. I'm advising and coaching somebody who's working with me. She's just been writing the scoring metrics for Voop Sports for football, because she was with Amelia. She was academy, Chelsea Academy, from the age of 8 to 17 years old, Chelsea Football Club, elite player. And she was going to be a footballer and then destroyed her knee. So she went and did a degree. But like I said to her, listen, you haven't even got football on your CV. I need somebody to work with me. And I said, listen, the thing is as well, that as a woman, as a man, I'm not going to be able to physically have babies. You at some point are going to have children. So I said to her, look at a role that you will be able to do when you have kids as well, that you don't have a career that you feel is suddenly killed off. Have that in mind. You can have a work-life balance now like no previous generation. See the world, travel the world, enjoy it while it lasts. Go and do work while you're traveling so your CV looks good. And just wait for everything to settle down.
Thank you very much, Geoff. For more information and what Geoff is working on, feel free to go into Voop.ai.
Yeah, there's nothing on there. It's very stealthy. Shh. Yeah, there's only one Geoff Glendenning, and there's not a football chant in that. There's only one Geoff Glendenning, but there really is. Geoff Glendenning, Geoff Glendenning. Yeah, love meeting people, love chatting. I believe in serendipity, particularly if you're a games researcher. Please contact me. I'd love to give you a demo of Voop and show how it will just change your game overnight.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
The understanding of powerful marketing can inspire everything from the identity of a studio and its games to the audience wanting to be part of the experience. The first 5 years of PlayStation is a true testament to disruptive marketing when games became cool. Thanks for watching. See you next time.